There's a moment, usually in the silence after another unresolved argument, or in the strange stillness after you've swallowed your truth one more time, when something in you whispers what you've been too afraid to hear. That this, whatever this is, doesn't feel like love, not the kind that honors you, not the kind that grows you. And yet you stay, not because it's right, but because you've confused familiarity with safety, because deep down, some part of you still believes that if you are patient enough, quiet enough, forgiving enough, they will eventually meet you where you've already been waiting. But they won't, not because they're incapable of love, but because your willingness to abandon yourself teaches them they don't have to change. And in that exchange, something sacred begins to die inside you. Self-trust, that inner compass that once told you what hurt and what healed, slowly gets drowned out by the noise of your rationalizations, the ones that say, maybe it's not that bad, or love means sacrifice, or at least they stay. But presence without respect is not love. Consistency without care is not safety. And every time you silence your needs just to keep the peace, you create a war within yourself. And no matter how beautiful the outside looks, you feel the bruises of your own silence on the inside, not from their hands, but from your own unwillingness to leave a situation that keeps asking you to shrink, to censor, to disappear. Because somewhere along the way, you learned that love meant endurance, that your pain is a test of loyalty, that if you hurt long enough, it will eventually be worth it. But it won't, not in the way you hope. Because the love you are trying to prove to them is the love you never fully gave yourself. And that is the wound. You keep betraying your own boundaries in hopes that someone else will validate your worth. But self-worth isn't something you earn through suffering it. It's something you remember by choosing not to suffer for what doesn't to see you. And yet, here you are, rehearsing resilience like it's a virtue, calling survival intimacy, making excuses for their lack of effort, while blaming yourself for wanting more. But wanting more ascend to the problem. Accepting less is, and that's the real heartbreak. Not that they didn't love you well, but that you stayed long after you knew better. Because you couldn't yet bear to confront the grief of loving yourself more than you love the story you've been telling. The one that says, this is enough, when your soul is already screaming that it isn't. And if you really loved yourself, not in theory, but in practice, you would stop explaining your pain to someone who keeps stepping on it. You would stop calling it loyalty when it's self-abandonment, and you would stop waiting for permission to choose yourself. Because the truth is, when love costs you your dignity, your voice, your aliveness, it's not love, it's bondage, and no amount of hoping will turn a cage into a home. And that whisper you keep ignoring, that's not your fear, that's your awakening. If you have to become smaller just to be held, if you have to silence your joy, soften your strength, or dilute your truth to be palatable, it is not love, it is performance. And every time you edit yourself to keep someone close, a part of you learns that your full self is unworthy of being seen. And so you begin to offer fragments, pieces you think they can handle, never the whole. And what's worse, you start to believe that this partial visibility is the price of connection, that being too much is a danger, that honesty is selfish, that having needs makes you weak. But none of this is true. And yet you build your relationships on these falsehoods because they feel familiar. Because somewhere in your past, you were rewarded for disappearing and punished for expression. And now you mistake compliance for intimacy, believing that being good means being agreeable. But love that only exists when you conform is not love, it is control. And here is the thing no one tells you. When you dim your light to avoid being abandoned, you abandon yourself first, and that becomes the blueprint, the unconscious agreement. I'll keep betraying myself if you promise not to leave. But real love doesn't ask you to amputate the parts of you that are loud, wild, complex, messy, real. Real love says, show me all of it. Not because it's convenient, but because it's true. And truth isn't always gentle, but it is always necessary. And if someone only stays when you're silent, you're not being loved. you're being tolerated. And the longer you stay in those dynamics, the more they teach you to forget yourself. Not through cruelty, but through erosion, through the soft, daily dismissal of your wants, your emotions, your intuition, until one day you wake up numb, functional but hollow, present but not alive. And that's the cost. Not just heartbreak, but disconnection from your own essence. Because you cannot keep rejecting your inner truth and expect to feel whole. And you'll start to notice it, not just in your relationships, but in your body, your breath, your creativity, your voice. Everything contracts when love is built on fear. And you will convince yourself it is just a phase, just stress, just hormones. But the truth is, your soul is suffocating in a container too small for its fullness, and you keep choosing it. Not because you don't know better, but because knowing better would mean leaving, and leaving would mean grieving. And grief is the one thing you've been trying to avoid. But here's the paradox. The moment you let yourself feel the grief, really feel it, the grief of all the years spent pretending, of all the times you laughed when you wanted to cry, of all the nights you stayed when you wanted to go, that's the moment you begin to return to yourself. Because grief, unlike silence, is honest. And in its honesty, it begins to cleanse you of the lies you've had to tell just to survive. And once you touch that truth, once you remember that your wholeness is not a threat, but a birthright, you'll stop shrinking to be loved. And instead, you'll expand to be met. And that's when everything changes. You don't stay because it's good. You stay because of the dream. The version of them that exists in your imagination. The one you keep trying to coax out of their silences, their apologies, their rare good days. You're not in love with the person in front of you. You're in love with the potential, with who they could be, with who they were once, briefly, before the mask slipped. And that potential, that possibility, is what keeps you circling the drain. Because if you just love them enough, heal them enough, wait long enough, maybe they'll become that person again. Or finally, but what you're calling patience is really self-abandonment dressed in hope. And the longer you cling to the dream, the more detached you become from reality. Because love doesn't exist in the maybe. Love exists in the moment, in how they show up or don't, in what they offer you or deny you, in whether you feel safe, seen, and free in their presence. And the hardest truth to swallow is this: they don't need to be cruel to be harmful. They can care about you and still not be capable of meeting you. They can love you in their own way and still dismantle you. Not because they mean to, but because their love demands you compromise the very core of who you are. That's not partnership. That's self-erasure. And your nervous system knows it. That's why your body tightens around them. Why you second-guess your intuition. Why you wake up tired, even after a full night's sleep. Because love that forces you to abandon your truth is not love. It's trauma bonding. It's the repetition of old wounds disguised as destiny. And until you break the pattern, you'll keep calling these bonds sacred when they're really just familiar. Your trauma will tell you to stay. Your fear will tell you it's too late to leave. Your shame will whisper that this is the best you'll get. But there is another voice, quiet and steady, the voice of your deeper self, and it has been watching you trade your worth for crumbs, watching you twist into shapes to keep the fantasy alive, watching you wait endlessly for someone who is never coming. That voice doesn't speak in desperation. It speaks in knowing, and it's telling you, you are not born to beg for love. You are not made to tolerate indifference just because they try. And no, it's not your job to fix them, to show them how to love you, to teach them how to see you. If they wanted to, they already would have. And that truth is devastating, but also liberating. Because once you stop chasing the potential and start accepting the reality, you free yourself to experience a love that doesn't require you to suffer to earn it. The moment you stop trying to rescue the person who keeps drowning you, you rise. And in that rising, you remember who you are. Not someone hard to love, but someone finally ready to stop calling pain devotion. There's a reason you keep staying. A reason you keep lowering your standards and calling it forgiveness. A reason you've grown so skilled at swallowing your voice, at pretending it doesn't hurt when it does. It didn't start with them. It started with the first time you felt unseen and decided to earn love instead of expecting it. It started with the belief that being chosen required sacrifice, that to be loved meant to be useful, agreeable, needed. And so you became a master of emotional translation, deciphering mixed signals, rationalizing neglect, glorifying crumbs. You stopped asking, "Is this good for me?" and started asking, "What more can I give to be enough?" This is not love. This is survival. And that survival is rooted in an ancient wound, the one that told you you had to earn your place, prove your value, perform your worth. You didn't learn to tolerate pain because you're weak. You learned it because once, long ago, it was the only way to stay connected. That tolerance became your currency. And now, you spend it in every relationship that resembles the original wound. You say, "Maybe if I just love them better, they'll love me right." But what you're really trying to do is rewrite history, to finally get it right with someone else, and in doing so, undo the past. But this attempt to repair what was broken in childhood through adult relationships doesn't heal you. It only deepens the fracture, because no amount of effort will ever turn an unavailable partner into a safe one, and no amount of understanding will ever make abuse feel like care. You think you're being loyal, but you're being loyal to the pattern, not yourself. And the pattern will always win until you choose to break it. That breaking feels violent. It feels like betrayal. But the real betrayal is in staying somewhere that keeps asking you to betray yourself. And here's the hardest truth. No one is coming to save you from that. No partner, no apology, no revelation will fill the emptiness that comes from living outside your own truth. You have to become the one who sees yourself clearly, fiercely. The one who no longer needs pain to feel connected. The one who stops waiting to be rescued and starts returning to her own body, her own voice, her own worth. This isn't about blame. It's about awakening. Because when you realize that your patterns aren't your fault, but your responsibility, everything begins to shift. You stop chasing and start choosing. You stop performing and start being. You stop tolerating what doesn't honor you, not because you're cold, but because you're finally warm enough toward yourself to say no. The wound will still ache. The grief will still come. But this time, it won't break you. It will guide you, because beneath the armor, beneath the silence, beneath the tolerance, there is a self who has always known, "I deserve more than this." There comes a moment, not loud, not dramatic, but quietly revolutionary, when you no longer feel compelled to explain your worth. You no longer rush to be understood, to be forgiven, to be chosen. Instead, you sit with yourself in a way that is both tender and unflinching. And in that stillness, you realize something. The love you were seeking was never about them. It was about the version of you that you abandoned to keep being loved. That girl who twisted, who overgave, who stayed too long in rooms that made her soul shrink. She doesn't need saving. She needs remembering. And as you begin to remember her, piece by piece, boundary by boundary, you also begin to rebuild the temple of your self-worth, not as a fortress, but as sacred ground. This is the turning point. When you stop asking, "Do they love me?" and start asking, "Does this relationship allow me to love myself?" Because anything that requires the rejection of your truth is too expensive. Anything that only survives through silence, tolerance, or self-editing is not love. It's a slow erosion of your essence. And when you truly begin to love yourself, not as a concept, but as a practice, everything changes. You no longer chase apologies that never come. You no longer mistake intensity for intimacy. You stop entertaining people who only love you in pieces. And most of all, you stop mistaking loneliness for failure. Because solitude, when born from self-respect, is no longer empty. It's holy. It becomes the space in which you finally hear your own voice again. The voice that says, I am allowed to take up space. I am allowed to leave. I am allowed to want more. And in that declaration, you stop settling. You stop explaining. You stop trying to resurrect what's already dead. This isn't cruelty. This is clarity. The kind of clarity that doesn't punish others, but honors yourself. And you begin to recognize that the real question was never whether they loved you. It was whether you were willing to stop betraying yourself to be loved. Because self-love isn't about bubble baths and mantras. It's about boundaries. It's about walking away from what diminishes you, even when it hurts. It's about refusing to participate in your own depletion. And when that kind of love, the raw, rooted, non-negotiable kind, becomes your standard, you stop accepting love that feels like survival. You start demanding love that feels like truth. And here's what's beautiful. When you become that honest with yourself, the world responds. Your relationships shift. Your energy expands. You attract what aligns, not what wounds. And even if that means fewer people, fewer attachments, the ones that remain will be real. Because they won't be built on need, but on truth. And truth, unlike illusion, never asks you to disappear in order to belong. So let this be the beginning, not of proving yourself, not of fixing anyone else, but of coming home. To the self who never needed to be chosen to be worthy. To the self who no longer confuses pain with love. To the self who knows, finally, how to say, I don't accept this anymore.